I assume that Syrian crisis is not stable and transformed many times from democratization demands to civil war, and now maybe it can be defined as a proxy war. Actually, talking about the fragmentations of politics in Syria may be required to go back to the 20s. As all we know, Syria was under French control after the collapse of Ottoman Empire, and France derived a minority politics and create a few power centers in Syria that caused instability for a decade. After a century, now unfortunately Syria has a new political experience in terms of fragmentation and instability because of the civil war. Actually, as all we know, the uprising began with the regime change demands and now evolved to civil war, and Syria is face to face of a division. All these developments in Syria have affected Turkey closely, because you know Turkey is a neighbor of Syria and has more than 900 kilometers of border. Actually, the turmoil in the region, and especially in Syria, was not Turkey's choice. Before the Arab Spring, I would like to remind you that before the Arab Spring erupted late in 2010, Turkey was not without its problems with the region, but it still enjoyed good standing in many respects. It has a good economic relations with almost all of the countries in the region and was trying to build a peace between Israel and Syria. For that, Turkey to act as a mediator in the intractable problems of its region, most notably in the conflict between Israel and Syria, as I said. The Arab Spring led Turkey to reconsider its regional approach. Before the outbreak of the civil war in 2011 in Syria, actually Syria was considered as a major success in Turkish foreign policy. Therefore, when the rebellion began, Turkey found itself in an awkward situation. On the one hand, it wanted to maintain the economic and political gains obtained in previous years with the zero problems with neighbors policy. On the other hand, appearing too supportive of clearly Assad regime would affect the country's prestige vis-à-vis the Arab public opinion. So that Turkey's early reaction to the crisis was to try to persuade Damascus administration to meet people's demands and make a political reform in order to prevent escalating the uprising. Moreover, the Turkish leadership believed that Assad has some liberal instincts and that he would be willing to implement political reforms in order to steer Syria out of the crisis through a gradual process. However, as events unfolded, it became clear that these assumptions were wrong and that Assad administration was not willing to make a reform. As Syrian state repression against the protesters increased, Turkey changed its approach dramatically. Actually, I consider this change not in ideological terms, but it stems from the real political conditions. As all we know, when the uprising started, the Turkey's Western allies, like United States, France, UK, called Assad to remove from the power. Moreover, in spite of Russia and Turkey was unwillingness, NATO invaded Libya and held a military operation to topple Gaddafi. These developments create an expectation that the same involvement can be held in Syria. But the United States and its ally changed their strategies and neither involved and make an operation against Assad regime nor stand with Turkey against the risk that it come face to face because of the civil war in Syria. And as long as Assad regime lost his control on Syrian territory, this situation created a power vacuum and that filled by the terror organizations. The rise of the ISIS and the other jihadist groups in the region, and particularly, of course, ISIS, which was initially able to take control over the large territory in both Syria and Iraq. And hundreds of thousands of refugees fled to Turkey. But unfortunately, Turkey has failed to provide an adequate response to this crisis. Moreover, Western allies did not make a cooperation with Turkey in order to stop terrorists that transit from European countries to Syria and Iraq. And the second factor that changed Turkey's Syrian policy was the strengthening of the Syria's PKK branch, that's called YPG, constitutes another strategic threat for Turkey, as YPG are affiliated to PKK. They also enjoy support from the United States, as they are willing to be most component, the ground force of United States in fighting against ISIS in Syria. During the initial phase of the Syrian crisis, actually Turkey consequently adopted a moderate stance towards the Democratic Union Party and the other Kurdish groups in Syria. Ankara tried to integrate PYD with other Kurdish groups in Syria and keep them separate from the PKK. But once PYD take United States support, separated itself from the National Kurdish Council and declared so-called autonomy areas in Syria. From mid of 2015 and until mid of 2016, Turkey was under attack of terror organizations. ISIS attacked from the other side of the border and made several suicide bombings in Turkey. The same attacks came from PKK as well. Moreover, PKK surrounded some cities to take part on south of Turkey in order to capture and control over these cities. Several suicide bombings from PKK and ISIS was attacking in Ankara and Istanbul, that the largest cities in Turkey. And the other factor that affecting Turkey's security, it was, as I said, the refugee influx from Syria. Turkey, as Syria's largest neighbor, has been particularly affected by the influx, with over 3 million refugees registered on its territory. This crisis has challenged Turkish financial and political capabilities. Under these conditions, Turkey had to revisit its counter-terror strategy and Syria policy at the same time. Started to negotiate with Russia and Iran in order to eliminate terror organizations. In August 2015, President Erdogan visited Moscow and met with President Putin to talk about Syrian crisis. After this meeting, Erdogan stated that Turkey can consider a transitional period in Syria that includes Assad administration. But unfortunately, just after a few months, in November 2015, a Turkish fighter shot down a Russian fighter aircraft on the Syrian-Turkey border. This led to a sharp confrontation between Turkey and Russia and stopped negotiations over Syrian crisis between these two countries. Seeking a rapprochement with Russia was success after failed coup attempt in July 15, 2016 in Turkey. President Erdogan had enormous victory on coup plotters, and the failure of the coup attempt produced a great impact not only on Turkish internal politics but also on Turkish foreign policy. Although Turkey is a NATO member and negotiated with European Union for a full membership, Turkey's administration did not get support against coup plotters. On the other hand, President Putin, in spite of the crisis between two countries, who called Erdogan in order to declare his support against the coup plotters. This rapprochement was a new beginning between Russia and Turkey, and actually a new era in terms of Syrian crisis. Turkey has taken necessary steps to improve its relation with key external players. It has continued the process of normalization with Israel, downgraded tensions with Iran, and apologized to Russia for the shooting down the fighter jet. Accordingly, Ankara is more involved in the fight against ISIS and PKK and has agreed to participate in talks with Russia and Iran to find a solution for the conflict in Syria. In other words, Turkey has revised its strategic priorities since that time Since that time, Turkey fight against PKK and ISIS as a priority threat. However, he acknowledged that the rise of ISIS has strengthened the PYD's position and support of United States to this organization. Therefore, a stronger stance toward ISIS was needed in order to reduce PYD and YPG influence in Syria. The rapprochement with Moscow and Tehran has allowed Ankara to deal with ISIS and PYD at the same time. In August 2016, Turkey started a massive operation in northern Syria, in the region between Euphrates River to the east and the area around Azaz to west. And this operation was called Operation Euphrates Shield. This operation was conducted actually for two main reasons. The first is to wipe out ISIS militants from Turkey's border, and the second, to drive a wedge between PYD's control areas, that so-called the cantons of Afrin and Kobani, ensuring in this way the territorial continuity of Rojava. And the second operation that we have witnessed of Turkey in the Syrian territories was the Olive Branch operation against the YPG in Afrin. The Olive Branch operation towards Afrin was the second military intervention for the same reason in territory of Syria. Turkey wiped out YPG militants from the border. More importantly, prevented the YPG corridor on Turkey's border that aimed to create a control of PKK-YPG. And from that time, actually, we have witnessed Turkey's main concerns towards fragmented politics or a divided Syria is not only because of the security reasons, but also for geopolitics for long-term objectives. Any de facto PKK control area on Syrian border will be a wall between Turkey and the Middle East. So, Turkey defends territorial integrity of Syria and Iraq and the other countries of the region. Actually, changing of Turkey's Syrian policy was a new era between Turkey and Russia, and now Turkish and Russian relations goes to a strategic point. Thank you.